welcome to Anant Goenka and Aroon Purie. Anant Goenka, as most of you would know, all of you would know, is the executive director of the Indian Express. He joined 6 years ago, right? And is responsible really for the big push Indian Express has taken in the digital area. He is a Dean Scholar in Print Journalism from the Annenberg School of Journalism. He's also taught over there. He was just telling us about a course he did on Indian journalism where India Today's material was coming up all the time. Clearly, Anant, with his grandfather's legend, has been educated more than any journalist school could actually teach. So he has, as he told me once, that he has newsprint running in his blood, or rather instead of blood. And he, because of his youth, has brought an understanding of the digital space which someone older than him possibly could not. And I think you saw most of you saw his interview with Campbell Brown, and that showed. Aroon Purie is the editor-in-chief and chairman of the India Today group. Although Aroon's educational background is not related to journalism, he has been a legendary editor, quite ruthless in demanding the best. I do remember in the 80s, Aroon asking for a cover story to be written 12 times. Today that wouldn't happen, of course, there's no time. There are enough stories about his editorial skills, but with changing times, he has also changed in understanding that the business side of the news organization is also important. I think this session is really important for journalists over here because very rarely, not rarely, we have never seen owners of news organizations being able to give their point of view and the problems they face in running an organization. It's always usually the journalist's point of view when they're trying to push a story or they have problems with in any area. And I think the film The Post, which I think most of you have seen, which we screened an hour ago, brings that to the fore, that Catherine Graham's struggles with Ben Bradley, her editor, at the Washington Post, showed the many areas of conflict that takes place when an issue to publish or not publish develops. And I will start with a scene from The Post to refresh you when this tussle is going on about whether they should publish the Pentagon Papers. Just to remind everyone, the Pentagon Papers were first part of it was published in the New York Times. The American government went to the Supreme Court to stop further publication, and the court decided in favor of the government that they should cease publishing the Pentagon Papers. However, they neglected to say anywhere. So other newspapers could publish them. And the Washington Post team got their hands on it. Now the decision was whether to publish or not. And while this tussle is going on, Tony Bradley, who is Ben Bradley's wife, tells him that Kay Graham is really brave. And she answers, she's not the only one who's brave, implying that he is too. And she says, no, because your reputation is being burnished by this controversy. You can go on and find another job. Whereas for her, this is her life. This is her legacy. And this is what I want to bring out in this conversation on what news organization owners go through, that although they would like to publish anything, but they also have to keep in mind what was holding Kay Graham back. So, Aroon, have you faced these kind of situations? And you've had, looking at 40 years of journalism, you and I old enough to have seen all the prime ministers of India. Yeah, we were alive, we were children when Jawaharlal Nehru was prime minister. And you've seen 18 governments with 2 prime ministers repeated, Indira Gandhi and I think it was Vajpayee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So with all those, you have a huge amount of experience dealing with various governments. Have you faced this kind of a situation?
Well, I think I've faced these situations, but it's the question of how you deal with them. I've always maintained that if you're going to publish something, it should be defensible. And that's my mandate to journalists is you can do any story you want, but I should be able to stand up and defend it with dignity. That you must have the evidence, you must have taken all sides of it. And if you follow those principles, then I don't think you have any issue. Number two, I think Kay Graham's issue was also, she was very friendly with the government. You know, she was,
that's another subject I want to come to later, that she was friendly with Robert McNamara.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's the other issue, is the fact that if owners or even journalists get friendly with the government and with bureaucrats or whoever's in power, right, you then are in a position where you get conflicted. Okay, you know, I'm going to expose people who I know very well. You know, I always tell the journalists that, you know, don't get too friendly with your sources and with the people you meet. And in this club, it's the Hindi phrase is, you know, ghoda ghas ke saath dosti karega to khayega kya, right? That's the issue. So I think that being friendly with governments, being in with them, creates all these conflicts for you. If you don't have that problem, and if you're publishing, you're in a country which is democratic and a free press, you shouldn't have any such issues.
It's no secret that Aroon is my brother, and I do happen to know how he leads his social life. And I would compare it to a judge's social life. He actually...
Yeah, you can't have friends.
Yeah, he actually has a very small group of friends and will not socialize with the Delhi business crowd or any other crowd, because I think I remember at one time when Rajiv Gandhi first came into power, he invited a lot of journalists for breakfast. This new prime minister trying to get to know the press. I called Aroon and told him that, you know, he's invited me to breakfast. He said, don't go. Once you go, you can't write in the same way. So that is an issue, but we'll come to that in a little more detail. Let's talk about not only your 6 years, but also the period before that, Anant. You must have known of incidents which you've had to face this decision. What can you tell us of what Indian Express did, besides the emergency? I mean, emergency, I think everybody is educated enough to know how your grandfather stood up to the government.
Yeah, so I think, you know, exactly what Aroonji just mentioned. I think really it comes down to how you sort of handle it. And I think, you know, if I hadn't grown up in Anant Goenka's home, I wouldn't be doing this. I'm quite sure I wouldn't be doing this, because I find the position that Aroonji is in, that my father is in, and that I've sort of learned to look up to is a very thankless place. Because very often you find that your newsroom hates you, the few friends you have in Delhi will also hate you, and you know, you're not making a lot of money out of it anyway. So you kind of think about, why are we really doing all of this? And I think, you know, if you come back and sort of remember the fact that it's just such a privilege to be able to influence public discourse, to be able to say, you know, these are the things that we would like the country to be discussing and talking about. I think if that's central to your motivation for being here, for coming out every day or every second now, I think these conflicts they all fall into perspective. And nothing has been, I mean, as you said, nothing is new. I mean, you've always gotten phone calls. I think the Indian Express has always gotten a phone call. I'm sure any real journalism outfit has. If you're not getting a phone call, you're probably not doing real journalism. And I think, you know, that's part of being who we are, really.
There have been times, Aroon, I know that in India today, there's also been pressure from corporates. I remember one time when you did a story on the Tata Group, and they withheld their advertising for a long period, I think almost a year. What do you do in a situation like that?
Well, without, I mean, getting into the details of that, because there's always two sides to the story. Actually, it was held up for 5 years. And they didn't like some coverage which we did. They banned us, and there's some other media too. And it was right across their group. That means everything. And they are a large group.
And they used to take huge pages, back pages.
I know, on television also. This was actually to do with the Neera Radia tapes, right? So they banned us for 5 years. And I think that the main lesson from this is, firstly, they're entitled to do what they want, right? In the sense that it's their money, they can spend it the way they want. So I don't think that we can crib about it. I think the moral of the lesson, the moral of the story is that you have to be financially independent. For 5 years, we didn't have any advertising from this group. They even banned us. I said, okay, don't give us advertising. I wrote a letter to them to say that, let us get your side of the story when we do stories about your group. They even banned us, all their group, from talking to us editorially. So it was that bad in the sense. So that was a difficult situation to be.
So worse than a government, actually.
Well, this actually goes to a larger problem, and that's a more endemic problem, is the fact that media in India is very cheap. And that's started off from the newspapers. It started with newspapers at 2 rupees, now they've gone up to 4 rupees. And it's what I call Raddi economics. Actually, you get the newspaper at the end of the month, you sell those old newspapers, you get more money than what you paid for, right? So the media is totally dependent on advertising. And that's wrong, right? People have to start paying more for media. It's even the same for TV channels. If you look at what you pay for the cable operator, right, you can get, I don't know, 300, 400 channels for 300 rupees or 500 rupees. If you convert that to dollars, it's nothing, right? So media is really cheap, which makes the media dependent on advertising, which makes you vulnerable. Your consumers must pay more for media. That's the only way you will become independent. And also you will produce content which the audience wants.
And also free you from what is called paid news or impact features.
And so I think that is a very structural problem, and it's kind of a legacy in India. If you look at abroad, New York Times, I think, sells for like $3, right? Economist in England is £6, right? Here in India, it's 350 rupees. We sell India Today for 60 rupees. So this dependence on advertising makes you highly vulnerable. And this model actually has to change now. Now, of course, with the digital media coming in, it's becoming even a bigger issue because everything is much freer. People don't want to pay for anything anymore, right? But I think...
I must interrupt you in that because the New York Times declared a $2 billion profit in their paid subscriptions, which they thought would never happen. And they were dependent on advertising, that is changing now.
So that's the point I want to make, is the fact that even going forward for digital, the people who will succeed are people who will have content which people want to pay for, right? And New York Times is that kind of content. People are willing to pay for it. Their digital subscriptions exceed their print subscriptions, right? That's the way forward. So consumers must pay more. You must produce valuable content which consumers want to pay more for, or pay at least, right? I think that's the future. So all this is all tied up together in terms of vulnerability.
But structurally, Aroon, I don't think that's happening at all. As you said, digital is only, in fact, it's only getting cheaper and more difficult to get people to pay for any kind of content.
No, I'm saying that, like, New York Times is a good example, right? In terms of
in fact, New York Times was warned by their accountants and auditors that this is an area you should not look at. They were told, the management was told, don't expect to make money from paid subscriptions, digital subscriptions. And that's been proven wrong. So maybe we're at the cusp of change. But tell me, Anant, talking about what, have you had pressures from advertisers, or we'll get to the government later, but from advertisers?
No, I mean, I think, okay, of course, right? Of course. I mean, we're the partners for Panama, and then all the subsequent stuff that happened.
And a lot of business names came out there.
There were lots of advertisers there in that list, you know, and I think, but you know, I also feel that we're sort of getting a little bit more evolved, you know, in the way advertisers' relationship with the publisher is. Like, I don't know whether a 5-year ban on India Today group by a group like Tata would, you know, I don't think it would be sort of taken as lightly as it, or rather, it would have commanded much more attention today, maybe. Because I think that we are very, I think generally we hold free speech quite close to our hearts.
But this is quite recent. This was during the Neera Radia tapes, right?
I think
the data ban.
Neera Radia tapes.
Yeah, so I think the last 5 years, I feel there has been a reasonable shift. You know, a lot of the advertisers, you know, they call, they'll complain, but you know, I feel one of the things about the Express is that the reason that they are in our paper is because they want to be associated with independent journalism in the first place. So I think, you know, we are able, I think the Express, we're able to sell beyond reach and frequency. We're able to sell a profile of audience. We're able to sell to the advertiser, you know, independence, sort of a certain kind of involvement with the reader. And I think obviously advertising, you know, cannot just be reach and frequency. Otherwise, we'll all just be sitting and, you know, I mean, what's the difference between Indian Express or really a Times of India or another, you know, printout that just goes to 5 lakh or 6 lakh homes?
You're probably getting calls from, say, your father's friends or whatever businessman. You have one advantage, which Aroon did not have. He in fact grew up where many people who came into power, he went to school with. And so you actually had to go through a process of cutting them off, right? And cutting access to you. And that means also that they would cut access to your reporters. Is that true?
No, I think the reporters do their own
They
job.
do their own thing.
Yeah, yeah. I don't
Now,
think
there
that's
was a
an
time
issue.
when Indira Gandhi threw out a reporter out of one of her press conferences because she was upset with India Today.
Yes, that happened when, in fact, now this has become such a big issue that we carried this, it's a Nelly massacre which happened in Assam. And we put it on a cover here, and NAM was happening in Delhi. It was a big kind of showcase for Mrs. Gandhi. And she was embarrassed by it. They had all the copies swept out from Delhi, picked up from everywhere. And then a reporter of ours asked her a question in Calcutta in a press conference. And then she just let off on him. You're anti-national, and you're a traitor, and you're this, and you're that.
That's a new term.
So it has a legacy.
Yes. So also, you did the other thing, that right after the emergency, you put her on the cover before the results were announced. And those posters were all over town. And then India Today was blamed for influencing the election for her coming back. So it can work either way.
Which one are you talking about?
When she just came back from
1980.
Yeah, 1980, just after the Janata Dal collapsed.
No, we'd done an opinion poll.
And the
so the opinion poll said that
she
she's
would come
going to
back.
be ahead, when the conventional wisdom was that she wasn't going to come back. And so we did what we discovered, which is the fact that the poll said that she was ahead and she was going to come back. So we put her on the cover.
And you were blamed for her coming back.
No, that I don't know. That, I mean, they
Now,
always keep shooting the messenger.
Out of all the governments that you have published India Today and the television, who has been the most controlling in trying to get into the narrative?
I think it's a question of how much you let them get into your narrative, you know. This government is one which watches you closely, right? Reacts to things which they find is wrong or whatever. And you need to be able to defend yourself. Beyond that, they're all about the same. I mean, I think you just go about your business doing it the way you should be.
And you, Anant?
You know, I tend to agree. I feel there's a lot of talk about how intolerant this government is and how sort of, you know, thin-skinned, you know, they can be to the press. And, you know, I think a couple of things. Nitin Gadkari was on one of our events recently, about a year ago actually. And he said, you know, we're just so used to being in the opposition that, you know, we don't know how to not be angry. Sort of, it's kind of just kind of going through with that still.
That's not an excuse that's acceptable.
So
Get used to it. You're in power now. Be magnanimous.
So I think, you know, I do think that there is a sort of sense that they are sort of new in government, and they're all new, inexperienced in sort of positions of power like they are right now. So I think maybe it comes across more, and so I think that is certainly a factor, but it's not new. It's always happened. We've had editors in jail.
Yeah,
emergency, you know, obviously
well,
one big
emergency
piece.
is a whole different area.
Even then,
but just in normal time. I want
think
to ask
it's
you.
got to do with the strength of the government also, right? Like this is the only single-party majority government the last 30 years. The stronger the government, I feel, the more pressure and the more sort of the more fake news you'll see going around, because actually fake news is more government than media, you know, if you think about it.
Now, what is your opinion of what happened in the last couple of days at ABP News? You are aware that they sent a team to Chhattisgarh to find out, to interview the woman who had given an interview saying that her income had doubled because of Narendra Modi's policies. And ABP News went there, interviewed her, and she said she was tutored to say that. And then she went on a press conference. I can't say whether she was tutored or not, but then she said, no, I didn't say that I was tutored. Then ABP went back to her, and again she said, yes, I was tutored for the press conference also. So there were tweets from the Minister of INV, Rajavardhan Rathore, and Nirmala Sitharaman, deploring what ABP News have done. Since then, one anchor person is off air, and 2 of them have resigned, Prasoon Bajpai and Milind Khandekar. So now there is this controversy that how do we know it's pressure from the government? But that's a bit like saying, unless you find proof, a solid proof of wrongdoing, for which can be no proof except a phone call or an ishara. What do you do there? What do you think of what has happened in the last 3 days?
You know, my view, so firstly, I met one of the senior management guys yesterday from ABP who said that he was always resigning and there's nothing is new. And so kind of, I mean, the party line from ABP side was very clearly that this is nothing to do with the story. So they're still maintaining that. So that's
I've heard that, yes.
Just FYI. My perspective from whatever you're just mentioning, you know, again, I mean, I would look at the proprietors here, you know, I don't think that phone call, you know, is surprising. I think the phone call would have come typically with any government. It's really up to the proprietors to sort of, you know, how do you tackle that phone call? And sort of how do you, this hurts your brand. This hurts ABP's brand, whether it happened, didn't happen, government called, didn't call. The fact that this is played out, it's hurting the ABP brand, right? So I think the onus does come on the proprietor.
Aroon?
Same. I mean, it's the proprietor's call. I mean, if he got a phone call, that means he's vulnerable on something that if it is because of this that these people have resigned, I don't know the internal facts. But then it's up to him, really, that he bent under pressure, what the pressure was, what does the government have on him, right? I don't know. But that's
is it possible that he believes that this wasn't a story to be done?
Could be. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm reading all kinds of reports that the instructions went out, don't do anti-Modi stories and so forth. So who knows? That's their call, how they want to present themselves. There are many channels and many publications which don't do anti-Modi stories. So it's up to them.
There have been editors, senior editors, who have been let go with the which it's kind of obvious those editors were following what was perceived as an anti-Modi government line, although they might be doing straight journalism, which happened to come out with negative stories about the present government. We know Krishna Prasad of Outlook went, Harish Mandar of Tribune Chandigarh went, Hindustan Times Bobby Ghosh went, and the number of unknown junior reporters who are not named and they're just told, please. So have you had calls which have mentioned that please let go of this person?
No. No.
I mean, I don't think it's ever going to be as direct as that. I don't know. I mean, in my experience, no. I can ask my dad. But in my experience, no. I don't think it's as direct.
This government lets you know that they're unhappy. Yeah. Unlike other governments, they'd be unhappy, but they do sneaky things otherwise to try and make life difficult for you. But this government says that, okay, I mean, you've done this story and you haven't done this and that and whatever. But it's up to you to decide how much you want to yield or not yield.
And cutting access is a big tool in the sense that we know two television journalists who are quite professional do not have a platform today. We know who we're talking about. And of course, there's no proof, but nobody's hiring them. So is this, you think, another element of behind the scenes pressure?
Well, I mean, they've cut out access to particular journalists. That means that that journalist can't actually do two-sided stories. He can only do one-sided stories. So it actually kind of cripples him. Cutting off access, I think it's a bad thing. It should not be done, right? But the governments tend to do this. Even the UPA did this for us. I remember when we invited Salman Rushdie for the conclave when he was banned from coming to the Jaipur Lit Fest. And we called him, and suddenly a whole lot of UPA ministers pulled out. Even the president didn't come, who had already accepted. So they put this kind of pressure. It happened to another media house where suddenly...
Don't say the name, because they never mention any other media house.
I'm not,
the largest.
I'm not mentioning any names. They withdrew their ministers from them, etc. So that's the kind of
their
pressure.
Conference they were having.
But, you know, if you think about the Washington Post, which has had such an incredibly, entertaining relationship with Trump, they've cut off access several times, and the Post has only sort of been able to sell more digital subscriptions and do higher quality journalism in spite of not having that, in spite of having a ban really to the White House.
Yes, and CNN also.
CNN also,
so
to
I
some
think
degree.
he's helping them.
I think what's happening is that this whole antagonistic relationship between news media house and government. I think it's a trend in a sense that, you know, this with us or against us. I think this is a reality of
No, it's not new, Anant. Excuse me.
No, it isn't.
Because there was one time where Newstrack, we showed a man being bludgeoned to death. And when the reporter came back and he said, "This is Chautala's men." I said, "How do you know? You're shooting from far. How do you know it was Chautala's men?" So we did not run it as Chautala's men have killed this. We just showed the footage. And papers picked it up and put it on the front page, the still picture. Nobody said, I mean, none of us, Newstrack, no journalist had said on camera that it was Chautala's man. But everyone presumed it was Chautala's man. Even Chautala believed that it was his man, unfortunately. And what he did was that he closed Aroon's printing press down for 6 months. He had a union problem, and he closed it down. He created a union problem there and closed it down as punishment. And I must say, I mean, okay, I don't know how to plead guilty for this, but I must say that Aroon never once said to me, "Why did you do this story?" Not once. It was just, and his business, business shut down for 6 months. So there are many ways that they can turn the screws. And Aroon, would you tell us about the time in 1988 when Rajiv Gandhi tried to pass the anti-defamation bill? What happened at that time?
I think that Rajiv Gandhi was getting very frustrated by the fact that so many stories were coming out and the fact that the defamation cases would never really get to any conclusion. So they thought this is a way to fast track it. And I think, to full credit to the press, everybody got together and said that this is not on. And there was, you know, his grandfather marched down Rajpath and everybody else was there. It was a great show of unity. Yeah.
All the editors.
Great show of unity amongst the press. And
rare.
What? Rare
today.
And they buckled.
Not really. Yeah.
They buckled, in the end, because it was, So I think wherever the press gets together and is able to show unity amongst themselves, the government listens. They realize that actually doing something against the press will give them greater detriment than any benefit they would get otherwise. And
So
that's
we have
always a
to-
counterbalance.
So we have to remind them of that, I think. There is a scene in the film The Post in which Ben Bradley, played by Tom Hanks, Ben Bradley lies to Catherine Graham. He's got the story and she says, "Do you have it?" And he says no, because he's afraid she'll stop it. And he publishes it anyway. Has that ever happened to you, where an editor has gone behind your back and published something which you're not totally in favor of for whatever reason? Maybe that the story is not airtight, that it hasn't closed all leads, it's you haven't got the other side. Has it ever happened that an editor has published behind your back?
Not me. I'm too hands-on. I know everything which is going on. Never happened.
But I think at the Express there's the idea, the model of having one very strong, powerful editor is something that I think has been going on since my grandfather's time, and I think we believe that is the best way to get really high quality journalism, and I don't think 6 years that I've been involved, I don't think that's it's not common for an editor or an Express editor at least the guys who are right now with us, I don't think they would break that trust. I think there's a lot of mutual respect, and I think it's a very unusual relationship, one of a publisher to an editor. And I think it's sacred.
Ben Bradley tells Catherine Graham in the film, which actually happened from her book, that he tells her, keep your finger out of my eye. When she tells him that, why don't you do some more stories on women? We've got 50% women readers. Keep your finger out of my eye. Nobody would dare say that to either one of you, right? This is India.
I think it's a culture you create in an organization also. I mean, Cat Graham would have had the confidence that Ben Bradley would do the normal norms of journalism to make sure a story is rock solid, right? If you have that culture in the organization, these things don't happen that often. There will be stories which have gaps, and you'll get comebacks, and you didn't know that, some part. Today, actually, with social media, it's great because the whole world out there full of experts, so some way or the other, who will judge your story and find out the holes which are there. So actually, for editors and for proprietors, it's a good check on journalists to make sure that their stories are robust.
I also think the scene that you mentioned, I remember noticing that scene. You're picking up all those scenes that sort of have registered in my mind when I saw the film a long time ago now. But I think it's to do with Catherine's decency again, the owner's and proprietor, right? It's her decency that she would approach a conversation with the editor that democratically, that she would sort of be as suggestive as she was in that scene, with, why don't you think about this? And I think really, as he said, it's the culture. It's that very, very special bond between editor and publisher, which I think can break easily on either side. If
there are always a lot of arguments. I think I know both your news organizations
should be very healthy. And
healthy,
I mean, at least
arguments.
I can tell you very often that Dad has. I have more often than him, but very often we have sort of allowed the editors have overruled us, and we've sort of gone with that judgment very often. But it's a conversation
That's never happened
of trust. No, probably not. Probably not.
That's not
There are things I want done which never get done, right? So that's another issue.
There are two incidents that I'd like to bring up, and I'd love your opinion on it, Anant. There was one time when Punjab was aflame. Raghu Rai had gone to Punjab, and he came back with pictures of an exodus of people leaving Punjab. It was like pictures of the partition. Roads filled with cars, bullock carts, tongas, everything, trucks. And you, at that time, there was an argument in the office that you said, if you publish this, there will be mayhem, panic, and we have to be responsible. I don't remember whether you published it or not, but I remember Raghu shouting, "Dam dikhao, dalo andar, ye kaise hua? Jab nikali hai pictures, main leke aayu." What happened?
We didn't publish it.
You did not?
No, we didn't publish it. But I tell you, another dilemma which I faced, and I'm never really sure whether I made the right decision, was Indian soldiers killed in Sri Lanka. We had those pictures.
I was just coming to that.
Which were really bloody pictures. Your soldiers lying there in a foreign country lying there. And Sri Lanka was aflame at that time. Big debate in the office whether we should carry it, not carry it, national, anti-national, and so forth, right? And it was, meaning, it wasn't who was winning or losing, right? It was just a picture of your soldiers dying there. In the end, we published it. It was on the cover. And I still don't know whether I made the right decision or not.
There's also, on that same issue, the reporter who went, the photographer who came back. I remember being in the office. I don't know why, but I happened to be there. And there was a huge fight going on between Raghu Rai, Dilip Bob, you, and this poor little photographer. So there was all these 5 men shouting at each other because Dilip, as I recall, had gotten a call from the army, and they wanted to debrief the photographer. And Raghu said, no way is he going to allow his photographer, because he was head of the department, allow him to be debriefed by the army, because it would mean that the LTT had taken him in with trust, trusting him, and if he was going to give them their locations and everything, his life would be at risk. Then what happened? Was he allowed to go to the army? Did you let him go, or did you stop him?
I don't think he went to the army. I don't know. This kind of happened in the background. Nobody brought this to my attention. It was an argument which happened within the office. I think Raj Chingappa is here, isn't he?
He didn't go.
He didn't go.
Yeah, Raghu had his way because, and also it was the photographer's life.
Yeah. So I don't think that was an issue. But that was and that's a cover. You have to realize a cover like that lying in somebody's drawing room for a whole fortnight at that time. It's a pretty gruesome thing to see every day.
We have enough time now for one last thing. In the movie Broadcast News, I don't know if either one of you has seen it. I suggest you see it. It's a fabulous film. A network producer accuses a reporter of crossing the line between journalism and entertainment. I think it was about 15 years ago when you mentioned the term to me, infotainment, anyway. His reply is, it's hard not to cross it. They keep moving the little sucker, don't they? Meaning journalism and entertainment. How do you monitor that your writers, particularly in the online field, do not get into cheap clickbait editorial?
It's tough. It's tough. Facebook, we had a conversation with Facebook right now. I think they have also realized that they've played a big role in sort of creating this whole clickbait sort of culture. I mean, there are whole newsrooms that have been trained to sort of write clickbaity headlines. And now they're saying they want to downrank clickbait. So I think, it's that old balance between sort of getting the reach and sort of having the quality content. And sometimes it's not easy to make those decisions. I think that, to look at content on the digital space, I always fall back on pornography. I think pornography has always been at the cutting edge of technology.
And India has the highest consumers.
I think Geo is a big role to play.
You're not supposed to mention brands unless they pay for it.
No, but I
Beep
think
that out.
No, but this is true in that until 2 years ago, the most content that was consumed on digital devices around the world was pornography. Now social media has overtaken pornography. Thank God we talk more than we watch porn. But if you think about it, as an industry, they've always been at the cutting edge of technology. They've monetized. They were the first to monetize a landline. When the hotline phone number.
Yes.
They invented pay-per-view television. You walk into a hotel room, you order a film. It was first, porn. Now you can watch a regular film. The idea even of YouTube, I had a friend who was working at Google just after YouTube was acquired. They actually hired the server architect of YouPorn to fix their uploading problems. So, pornography has always been at the cutting edge. And so I had a conversation with Sunny Leone some time ago, and I asked her,
We have a filmmaker, Dilip Mehta, here, who made a film on her, a documentary.
Okay, I'll meet him after that. But
Sometimes sunny, sometimes cloudy.
So I'm trying to keep a straight face on a pornography conversation.
Sorry. No, it's a big hit on Netflix.
Sure. I haven't seen it.
See it. It's not porn. It's a documentary about a woman survivor.
No, but so I asked her. I said, how do you charge $27.99 a month, and you say you have 1 lakh subscribers from India? How do you are the most commoditized content there is, right? I mean, all pornography in a sense is commoditized. And she said that, she said, Anant, I realized a long time ago that I was not selling an act. I was selling an emotion. I am selling an emotion. Oh. And I thought, and this conversation happened about 3 years ago. And I thought that was so close to what news is now, right? Like it's so emotional, it's so charged. So I think, the idea of entertainment, I mean, it's a balance, and it's tough to fight it sometimes. And for the explicit perspective, what we do is we kind of try to, do anything that's accurate, but can still be entertaining, but still do the high quality stuff, which is, we market as different.
Yesterday, last evening, I wish you were here, we had these stand-up comics. And one of his little skits was that their jokes are being stolen by reality, because when they think of a joke, it actually happens, so they lose their material. And Aroon, I asked you about this, how to control editorial from getting cheap, clickbait. material on the websites.
Well, to carry on this pornography thing, different strokes for different folks, right? So, I think that it again depends on which space you want to be in, right? If you're in the space of not being in clickbait, but being into serious journalism, I think that that's the kind of culture you bring up in your organization. I sincerely believe that the future lies in people producing content which people want to pay for. So whether
it has to be quality,
so it'll be pornography or it'll be serious journalism, right? Everything else sooner or later will become a commodity, in the sense freely available, right? So it's really to decide. You can't do both, in my opinion, right? You can't be clickbaity and at the same time do serious journalism. It doesn't mesh together, right? So if you're creating a newsroom which is creating serious journalism, you stick to that and hopefully produce content which people will want to pay for.
Which is what you said, that it's good business.
Yeah.
And both of you...
Well, New York Times is a great example.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you'll be surprised, Arun, if you look at the back, they will not put it on their homepage, with the amount of viral content that both the Washpo and the New York Times have. And I think it's, can you do entertainment, the New York Times way, is always where it comes around to. And, of course, there's a big difference between the New York Times' viral section versus xyz.com, right? Like, it's always going to be a difference. And I think that's really where, as publishers, we need to get together, more and sort of fight for that differentiation with, commoditized content and sort of premium content with the advertiser.
But it's easier for the New York Times because they have written comedy all the time with Trump. So it's entertainment with politics. Ours also borders on that sometimes. But I think that the point made here is that we have seen that websites who've just gone for clickbaits got huge investments initially and then crashed.
They've all crashed. They've all crashed. They've lost half. BuzzFeed has dropped $1 billion in market cap in the last 6 months. Yeah. You've got a situation where you have the life cycles of all these digital content products are not even 2 years, and the reason India Today has been around for as long as it hasn't, or Express has been around for 85 to 86 years now, it's because your main motivation is to keep sort of pushing the envelope in terms of quality of content. That's really, I think, what I hope is what's going to take it for another 83 years.
Well, that's very positive and hopeful. We open it up for questions.
Hi. Sorry. Hi, I'm Amy Kasman from the Financial Times. I wanted to ask you, you've talked about the importance of free speech and how Indians really value their free speech. And at the same time, India fares very, very poorly on the Reporters Without Borders Media Freedom Index. It's ranked about 134 out of countries in the world for media freedom, which I find really surprising because everyone thinks here there's quite a free media. I wanted to ask you how you feel about, you've talked a lot about the phone calls that come. How do you assess whether your fellow proprietors are really standing up to pressure from either the government or corporates? And I'd also like to ask you whether pressure is more intense from the government or, in fact, from corporates on media owners and newspaper houses, media houses.
Well, I wouldn't want to comment on other proprietors. I mean, that's their business, what they do. As far as government pressure is concerned, I don't think it's something which we take. It's not so much government pressure as affiliates of governments, outside. Today, in fact, the pressure which comes from trolling, from social media, right, and that builds up into some kind of a frenzy, even leads to people demonstrating outside, etc. That's a different kind of pressure, right? Government pressure, as I said, is only as vulnerable as you want to be. What is the other last part of your question?
No, corporates.
Pardon?
Corporate pressure. Pressure from corporate. About the pressure from corporates. I
don't think that's minimal in the sense that they may withdraw your advertising, etc., but they're not calling up and say carry this or carry that. If I may take another subject, is the fact that I know there are a lot of journalists here, so I'm entering into enemy territory. Let me tell you about journalists. Yeah, what worries me the most in the newsroom is what I call greenhouse journalism, which is plants. Planted stories. People who are planting stories onto journalists, right? And they are sources who will never stand up for you once you publish the story. And it's always for or against somebody. And that worries me the most. And the people who plant stories today have become very smart. They give partial information, they make it look very authentic, you know, all that. And that is, you have to have enough filters and enough check to stop these plants. And number two, this is about journalists. Journalists fall in love with their stories because they have a little scrap of information, they build a whole premise around it. They don't want anybody to destroy that. So they won't go out and ask all the people who are affected by the story. And therefore, it's really important that stories are checked out thoroughly. And journalists don't get attached to their stories, that they're open to the fact that their stories may not be fully correct. They have to amend what they're saying.
And it's very tough to drop it at that time because you believe in it.
You believe in it. Yeah.
It's
so
a tough thing.
Those actually, to me, are the greater dangers in journalism which are happening today in terms of what gets published, is the way how journalists are being used by outside agencies to use media to further their cause in some way or the other.
And also a very dangerous thing that is happening currently is that if there is a politician within the government who wants to pull a colleague or another minister down, he will plant a story and you will think that, oh, I'm getting a great story which shows up the government. But you're a tool. You're being used by one minister against another. And this happens with corporates also. So it is very difficult to kill a story or push down a story if a journalist insists that it's absolutely airtight and you know it isn't because it's a plant and very little verification on it. And these are issues which create huge arguments in all newsrooms. And I guess in the end, it's the editor's call.
No, I think, you know, the editor's call, yeah, sure. I mean, that's a short-term answer. But I think long-term, if I can just add to what Aroonji was saying, I think journalists also have a lot of introspection to do. I feel there's a lot of, I mean, if I call myself a journalist, which I'm not, but if I call myself a journalist for this piece, I think we are we're getting increasingly opinionated. And I think that that's something which is clouding our judgment of the way we write our stories, the kind of facts we go to look for. Maybe often it's just because, you know, we just, you know, are so charged with a particular, either an ideology or a particular feeling or a particular emotion towards or against someone.
Excitement of getting a scoop.
That's the best reason to sort of, you know, be motivated a story. That I'm not as sort of concerned about as, you know, the idea that you sort of you're approaching any story with a predetermined view. And I think, you know, you mentioned a few of the journalists, you know, going to have access and stuff. You know, I think one of the reasons that Modi is so, this whole government is so sort of antagonistic towards the press is, you know, he often says he's never, you know, he's here in spite of the press, you know. He's had a lot of people against him, and in spite of that, he's got this huge majority. And, you know, if you look back, I do think there are a lot of people who just never really gave him a chance. You know, they kept blurring the lines between activism and journalism in terms of being, so I think that, you know, if we have a completely clear conscience that all our reporting, the toughest stories have been done, you know, with a very objective perspective, we're actually going to also be at fault at some point.
My name is Saurav Das. My question is to all three of you. We have seen how few media houses and few newspaper organizations act as PR agencies for governments, not only this government, for any other government, and also cases of sensationalism and yellow journalism. So do you think the media is free of its own crime? I call it a crime because misleading thousands and lakhs of people is no less than a crime. And second, do you think all self-regulation measures have failed? And how can we fix this?
I think you have to reject the brands that you think are doing PR for journalism. And that onus, again, comes on the reader. You know, a lot of what you don't like about media is things that media is doing because it sells or because you are consuming it. So I think, you know, there's a lot of responsibility that lies on the reader's side also.
Yeah, we're a pluralistic society. I mean, you can choose whichever channel you want to watch or whichever publication you want to read. If you don't like what they're doing, don't buy them and put them out of business. But I do believe that journalists, media organizations have a responsibility, just like doctors do, must follow a code of ethics, that their job is to be as objective as they can be. I mean, try and get both sides of the story, be balanced, etc. That if you don't do that, then you're betraying your profession. And it's a sacred profession in a sense. I mean, it's maybe a big word to use, but it's like being a doctor, like a teacher, and a journalist has that social responsibility and should never take that away from you. If you do that, then you're just like anything else, just a businessman.
Quite sure that Tom Hanks' character did not lie to Catherine Meryl Streep. What he said was not yet. So that's a bit of fake news.
He had it. He had the story.
But
he
didn't
told
say
her
no,
not yet.
Not yet.
But he did have it.
Okay.
So he lied.
Okay. Okay. So the question really is on graft. Would you rate Modi as amongst prime ministers as one who's done maximum against graft in our country? And it's a related issue, and since the Prevention of Corruption Act has now changed to make the receiver, the bribe giver, also culpable, now will you sort of put a new set of policies amongst your reporters, journalists, people who are getting the scoop that they can't now pay out any money to get stories in a sense?
I mean, where did you hear that you pay out to get stories?
But my primary question is on how do you rate Modi as a prime minister fighting graft?
Let's be clear. I don't think it's journalism if you're paying to get stories. Nobody's supposed to do that. I haven't heard of it.
Okay, my question here is, first of all,
Please answer his question.
I think that Prime Minister Modi has raised the issue of corruption, brought it into the public space, taken some actions against corruption. He's removed a lot of the crony capitalism which existed in this country, introduced certain laws. So I think I'd rank him pretty high on working against corruption. Now, corruption is not something you can weed out overnight. The corruption maybe on top has become less, but he has to change the whole structure of bureaucracy in order to remove the everyday corruption which we face in getting normal things done. That's another issue. But he's done, I believe, done pretty well on corruption and in terms of raising it as an issue.
I mean, I think, we have only way to go is up in terms of less corruption. So I think, of course, he's done a fair amount, it's quite evident, but I mean, there's just so much more to do in terms of getting rid of corruption.
All right, so I have a question. First of all, Aroonji, I'm a great admirer of you and the India. Great admirer of India today and you, because the manner for the last 40 years, you have kind of carried forward this group with a lot of values and ethics. But now my question is that, we have spoken about the government interference and the corporates. So one more new angle which has come is the corporates kind of co-opting media, like putting money in the media, getting them as a major shareholders. So how does this angle influences the media houses? And the second question is that, as you rightly said, the financial power of the media is important because that's what makes you sustainable. But at the same time, a journalist, when he walks in, the first thing he said is all about being right, truthful, making money is bad. So isn't it ethically, but right. But I'm saying is that's, they get carried away that this is the right thing is the first important, but at the same time, you're also running a business. So how do you, see this as a paradox or as a complementing each other? But my main question is...
Very good question he's asked.
Yeah.
Because it's long, but the one question I think that he's asked is really good, is corporates, business houses with other businesses coming into the media, and I would add to that politicians, especially in the South, who own media houses. That, I think, was a very important question he rose.
Well, it depends on media house to media house, right? India Day Group has an outside investor. They're not a majority holder in any way, but I can say with great clarity and strength is the fact that there's never been any interference from them. In fact, I'll give you an incident with the same group. There was a time for the conclave we invited the Dalai Lama to be the opening speaker. The Chinese government was very upset about it. The Chinese ambassador contacted me, various reporters saying, disinvite him, you can't have him here, why are you calling him? And we said, politely declined, that no, we can't do this. It's a free country, he's a guest in this country, he can definitely come and speak. It didn't succeed with us. They went to the foreign ministry. The foreign ministry told them, look, it's a private business, we got nothing to do. Then they went to the sponsor of the conclave, which happened to be the Aditya Birla Group. And they told him, you have factories in China, right? You will be in trouble if you don't get anything done about this Dalai Lama invitation, right? It has to be withdrawn. And Mr. Birla told him, we don't interfere in editorial, right? It is their business. You do what you want. So there are industrialists and there are industrialists.
So life is not simple.
But I do think that, I mean, I feel we're quite blessed to not have any corporate relationships structured or otherwise, because I feel it does liberate you a little bit from journalism. Certainly it does.
We're out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aroon. Thank you, Anant. It was wonderful. Historic, I think.